Hello there. In one of my recent videos I mentioned that I would be making more videos about atheism and not believing in God, because it's clear to me from speaking to evangelical Christians, especially evangelical Christians who used to be Jehovah's Witnesses, that many of them are completely in the dark to the arguments for atheism. And I think that if you're intellectually honest, it's good to know what both sides of the argument are, so that even if you decide, having heard both sides of the argument, that you still want to be Christian or that you still are Christian, that's fine, but at least you are enriched by hearing the other side of the argument, so that when you next encounter someone who is a non-believer, you at least know where they're coming from, you know what their reasons are, or what their reasons are likely to be. And in this video I want to talk about anti-theism, so in other words, being against God or disliking God, because that's a subject that I think is misunderstood. In fact, I think there's a lot of things about atheism that are misunderstood, and there seems to be this misconception, or at least in my view it's a misconception, that there is like a graded scale from theist to anti-theist. So it goes something like theist, and then agnostic, and then atheist, and then anti-theist. So that's like the graded scale that I think a lot of people have in their minds, and honestly that is not how it works in my mind. I think that it's possible to be an anti-theist theist. So it's possible to believe in God but not like him. That is conceivable. I'm sure there are lots of Satanists who that applies to, who they believe that God exists, they just don't like him. It's also possible to be an agnostic anti-theist. So you're not sure whether God exists or not, but if he did exist, you wouldn't like him. And the same would apply to an atheist anti-theist. And to add to what I said in my last video, I actually don't think there's a huge difference between being agnostic and being atheist. Because if you're agnostic, that's making a statement of what you know or don't know. So when you say you're agnostic, you say, I don't know whether there is a God or not. But when you say you're atheist, you're making a statement of belief. You're saying, I don't believe. You're saying, I personally don't believe that God exists, but I'm happy to look at the evidence, you know. And I am personally an agnostic atheist, because it's possible to be a gnostic atheist, beginning with G, where you assert that there is no God and therefore you don't believe in him. But I'm an agnostic atheist, as are in fact most atheists, I think you'll find. So I say, I can't be sure 100% whether God exists or not, but I don't believe in him. But I'm open to evidence for his existence. Now, anti-theism, I think, is almost a natural progression from not believing that God exists. And I'm going to explain why that's the case. And I'm going to first do that by approaching this subject from the angle of Jehovah's Witnesses, because after all, most of my videos deal with Jehovah's Witnesses and what Jehovah's Witnesses believe. And not so long ago I did a video called What If Jehovah's Witnesses Were Right? And that had quite an interesting reaction. In fact, I know of at least one person where that video helped them to start thinking about things critically, and eventuated in them, or helped to eventuate in that person waking up from his indoctrination. When you actually think about Jehovah's Witness beliefs rationally and follow them to their full progression, you're left with some very important decisions. And I'm going to give you one example which I already mentioned in the video I'm describing, and that's to talk about Armageddon, Jehovah's Witness beliefs regarding Armageddon. Now, one objection I had to the video I'm describing is I had Jehovah's Witnesses say, oh, well, that's not what we believe. We don't believe that Jehovah is going to slaughter everyone who's not a Jehovah's Witness when Armageddon comes. That's just not what we believe. And it's charming that, you know, so many Jehovah's Witnesses don't know what their own religion teaches. But just in case you are one of those people, I'm going to read to you a couple of paragraphs from this 1992 Watchtower article titled, Who Will Escape the Time of Distress? And it makes it very clear, in my view, who will survive Armageddon and who won't. Paragraph 6 on page 15, this is the May 1st, 1992 Watchtower. It says, Joel 2:32 says that everyone who calls on the name of Jehovah will get away safe. For in Mount Zion and in Jerusalem there will prove to be the escaped ones, just as Jehovah has said, and in among the survivors whom Jehovah is calling. Jehovah draws them out, and they call on his name with faith in Jesus' sacrifice before the climactic shaking of the Great Tribulation. So they've got to call, these survivors of Armageddon have got to call on Jehovah before the Great Tribulation. It says, happily, the precious great crowd, now numbering more than 4 million, this was 1992, it's now 8 million, comes into Jehovah's house of worship in anticipation of his rocking all the nations at Armageddon. So the great crowd has to come into Jehovah's house of worship. And then paragraph 7, how do these survivors call on the name of Jehovah? Remembering what it said in Joel 2:32, everyone who calls on the name of Jehovah will get away safe. So how do these survivors call on the name of Jehovah? James 4 verse 8 gives us an indication stating, draw close to God and he will draw close to you. Cleanse your hands, you sinners, and purify your hearts, you indecisive ones. As with the anointed remnant who led the way, those who hope to be of the great crowd of Armageddon survivors must act decisively. If you hope to survive, you must drink deeply from Jehovah's purifying word and apply his righteous standards in your life. You must be decisive in dedicating your life to Jehovah, symbolizing this by water baptism. It couldn't possibly be any clearer in this Watchtower that if you want to survive Armageddon, you've got to get baptized as a Jehovah's Witness and live your life in obedience to what the governing body tells you to do. So there's the basis for what I said in my previous video that people were questioning. Let's take that teaching and apply it the way I did in the video I'm describing. So as of now, Earth's population is 7.3, I've just checked, 7.3 billion. It could be a lot more than that. It could be maybe a billion more. But the estimates at the moment are 7.3 billion people on the planet. Okay, how many Jehovah's Witnesses? Well, as I said before, there are 8 million Jehovah's Witnesses. Now, the annual memorial attendance is roughly 20 million. So let's be very generous, bearing in mind that when you're a Jehovah's Witness, you're told that just because you are a Jehovah's Witness, that doesn't mean you're going to survive. There could be Jehovah's Witnesses who die in Armageddon, is what you're taught when you're a witness. But let's be generous and say that not just every Jehovah's Witness, but everyone who attends the memorial, so families of Jehovah's Witnesses, people who are interested, they get to survive Armageddon too, which isn't what it says in the Watchtower article I've just read. But let's be generous. Let's say 20 million survive Armageddon. And let's be even more generous and multiply that figure by 5. So that, let's say that for every person who attends the memorial, Jehovah's going to save 4 extra people at Armageddon. So, 5 times the number of memorial partakers. 100,000 100 million people are going to survive Armageddon. Let's be really generous, and I can't be more generous than that. Okay, so still 7.2 billion people will die at Armageddon, even after we've been so generous. More generous than the organisation is, far more generous than the organisation is in its literature. Jehovah, the all-wise, the all-loving, the all-merciful, is going to massacre 7.2 billion people. Now, if you like, you can admire and respect and love a deity who would kill people based on their religion in this way. Or, like me, you can say, that's not on. I object. That is immoral. It is immoral to slaughter somebody just because they don't have the religion that you would like them to have. Now, the minute I make that call, the minute I give my opinion in that way, I become an anti-theist. So I'm saying, I don't care that this is something that is important to Jehovah's Witnesses, something that they're indoctrinated to think is a good idea. I think it's a bad idea, and I think a God who does this is obscenely immoral and a sadist and a psychopath. And I would do my utmost to stop this from happening if it was in my power to stop it from happening. And if I survived Armageddon by some miracle, I would not participate in the global burying of 7.2 billion victims of a sadist massacre and act of genocide. I wouldn't make myself an accessory to that global crime, the biggest crime that the universe would ever have seen. I wouldn't support it in any way. I would be condemning it as the act of gruesome horror that it really is. Now you could say, well, okay, well that's what Jehovah's Witnesses believe. What Christians believe is different. You know, they believe in a far more loving God. Do they? Honestly, when you read the Bible, and something that I'm often told by evangelical Christians is, oh, well, you should read the Bible. You know, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Your problem is that you just haven't read the Bible. No, my problem is that I have read the Bible. And I have seen what the God of the Bible is like. And I'm sorry, I don't like him. I can't say I hate God, because I think that to hate something, to hate a person, they have to be real. Hatred, in my view, is something that you feel passionately about. And I can never feel passionately about someone or something that I don't think is real. But I can dislike someone or something that isn't real. So I can dislike, for example, Darth Vader. I can say, I know Darth Vader's not real, but if he were real, I would probably hate him, and I dislike his character. I don't approve of him slaughtering all those younglings in episode 3. It's a horrible thing to do. I don't like him. And I can make the same judgment of God once I'm free of the pressing need to worship him, because I'm no longer bound by a religion. So I can make a judgment call. I can say, well, actually, I don't think it's right that an entire nation of Amalekites, including women and children, should be slaughtered. I don't agree with that. I don't agree with slavery. Slavery, of course, being mandated or legislated for in the Bible. I don't agree with it. It's against my morals. It's an immoral thing. And yet it's something that God lays down laws for in the Bible when he should have been condemning it. So God and I have a disagreement on that. I could go on. There's the scripture that I always struggled with when I was a witness was the scripture where God orders that a man be stoned to death for collecting wood on the Sabbath. Now, probably there are crimes that are worthy of execution. Probably there are. That alone is a debate. But even if there are crimes worthy of execution, I don't think that collecting wood on the wrong day is one of those crimes. I think that killing somebody for such an innocuous reason is itself a crime. I think the crime is committed by the person who stones someone for that reason. I could go on. There's the I think probably the most famous example of immorality or God-approved immorality in the Old Testament is the example of Abraham being told to sacrifice Isaac. Now, you could say, well, that never happened. Abraham at the last minute was stopped from killing his son. But the point of the whole passage, the point of the whole section of the scriptures is to tell people, or tell people reading the Bible, that if God tells you to do something, you should darn well do it, even if it means sacrificing your child. Now, I'm now a father, and if somebody told me that I had to kill my daughter because God wanted me to do it, I would have some very choice words for that person. It's a deeply immoral thing to even think of killing a child because a deity has ordered it. And a deity who does order such a thing is immoral. So, I could go on and on. There's lots of examples like that when you do read the Bible, which is why I always kind of chuckle to myself when a Christian says, oh, well, you just haven't read the Bible yet. No, it's when I read the Bible that these feelings of consternation and disgust at the character of the God of the Bible start to well up. It's when I actually read about him and read about his personality that I dislike him more and more. And I don't want to go on too much because I'm aware that I'm already probably offending huge swathes of viewers who are believers, but I've tried to be as respectful as possible. And again, I hope that this will at least help you to understand why people like me exist and what their thinking is. And then maybe you can try and formulate more educated and more sympathetic responses to those kinds of complaints. More information is better than less information. But before I leave you all, I want to leave you with a clip of Stephen Fry answering the question: if you were confronted by God when you died, what would you say to him? How would you try and make your way into heaven as an atheist? Because I'm amazed at how few evangelical Christians who approach me are actually aware of this particular interview, because what Stephen Fry says is brilliant and perfectly sums up not just what anti-theism is and the reasons for it, but how easy it is to make the progression from not believing in God to saying, well, even if he were real, I don't think I'd like the guy. I just wouldn't. So if you've made it this far and you're a believer, great stuff, but just try and watch the end, because I'm now going to show you a brilliant interview that you need to see, if only to educate yourself on where atheists are coming from. And thank you for watching.